Alright guys, how the heck are ya? Time for a long-awaited video, E39 M5 versus E92 M3. As you guys know, I have an E39 M5, which we are in today. I also have an E92 M3, and it seems like lately especially, there's a lot more people asking, what do you like more? Why? What should I buy? You know, that kind of question. So today, I'm gonna spend some time going through the differences. So right now we are in my 2003 E39 M5, carbon black metallic, 138,000 miles, still going strong, and we're gonna start with this car. And really the purpose of this video is to kind of give you the pros and cons of each, and maybe why you might want to consider one over the other, or maybe a couple of things to look out for when you're looking at both of these cars, whether you want to own both or whether you want to own neither. These are the two cars that I have that I get a lot of questions on. So it's funny about the E39 M5, and the first thing that comes to mind is the insane cult following for this car. I knew this car had like a big cult following. There's a lot of guys that really love them, but I didn't realize how big of a group it was, or how tightly knit every person was. Essentially what I'm trying to say is, when I was looking at this car, I sent the listing around to a few of my friends who had E39 M5s, and a few of them knew the car. And in fact, one of them had driven the car. So that is how tightly knit these kind of guys are. So that's one thing that you're going to be involved in, is the tight-knit and ever-loving community of these cars. I think a lot of it is because probably they're a little more rare of an M car versus like an E92. They made a lot more of them. The E39 M5s, I believe they made about 9,900 or so, at least in the US. So from a main production standpoint, there's not that many out there. So of course, part of that goes into the looks. There's no other car that really looks like this one. It's very classy, it's very timeless, and I think it'll really look good forever. It looked amazing when it came out, and honestly, it's so special. Every single angle looks good, and there's not a lot of cars you can say that for. Okay, so let's kind of get into the driving. You know, why would I drive this over the M3, or, you know, vice versa? And for me, the M5, which it always pretty much has been, is a very comfortable, very purposeful, serious, well-built cruiser. And that's not to say that it can't handle the curves, but for me it is such a gentleman's proper car, you know, a true wolf in sheep's clothing. We're going around a little turn here. There's not many turns on the route that I'm going today, but it's a very like properly set up car. What I mean by that is it does have a lot of the same things as the M3. It has a limited slip diff, has 400 horsepower, 370 foot-pounds of torque. So it has solid power for the age. It actually was the fastest production sedan of its time. So smooth. The M5 has an S62 V8 engine. That is the BMW code for it. And oh my God, it is glorious. Low-end torque, high-end power, revs to like, I don't know, 6,500, which is plenty for most applications. And it just feels so good. It loves the power. It's just such a happy car. But the engine paired with the 6-speed transmission, especially at the time, I mean, 400 horsepower in the early 2000s was a big deal, guys. You don't want to put an SMG with that or anything like that, because that would have just been a terrible experience. So this car with the 6-speed is perfect. It's just glorious, guys. You don't even know. I mean, you know if you have one, you probably have one if you're watching this video, but oh my God. Okay, so now we've got into, you know, the cult following, the power, the balance. It just feels really good. Like, for the age of this car, I understand why people love this thing so much. So let's get into something that I'm really not a huge fan of about this car. One of the things is the steering feel. It is a 5, you know, the 5 series in general has not been as sort of raw or kind of connected feeling as maybe an M3, which I would kind of understand on BMW's side as sort of on purpose. but the steering system they put, I think it's a recirculating ball or whatever it's called. I feel like it's just super old school. They could have done a little bit better job at kind of making the steering feel a little bit, you know, you pop it into sport mode, it feels a little tighter, but it doesn't have that kind of raw connected feel like maybe the M3 or something like that feels, which kind of makes sense because it's a 5, so I get it, but at the same time, they could have done a little bit better job. So we've kind of gone through like what you're going to experience when you have this car. You're going to have good power, it's going to look sick at every angle, and the interior is nice to be in. You know, it's an older car. This car is 17 years old, and you know, it's an older style vehicle, so you're gonna have to retrofit some Bluetooth in here if you want to live in it for any period of time and have your music and phone calls and stuff. But generally speaking, you know, the setup is kind of what you'd want. You know, everything is set up that how you would expect, especially as a BMW owner. You're kind of familiar with it. So let's go on to sort of the elephant in the room, and that is maintenance, reliability, cost of ownership. I could make 17 videos on why you need to make sure you do bring your wallet for owning one of these cars, because driving this thing pretty much every day has yielded a very, very high bill of maintenance over time. My car has 138,000 miles. I take pretty good care of it, and it was taken care of prior to my ownership, but you're driving a 17-year-old M car with over 100,000 miles. There's just there's just only so many possibilities of good luck that can happen for that period of time. So what I'm trying to say is, last month I replaced the driver's side window regulator. 2 weeks before that, I replaced the driver's side brake caliper. About a month before that, I replaced the windshield wiper motor. About a month before that, I fixed both of the rear door vapor barriers. A couple months before that, I bought tires. I did front brakes. I did rotors. I did a tune. I did all of the fluids. I did an exhaust hanger. I did a clutch. I did a flywheel. I did a rear main seal. I did an input shaft seal. Plugs, coils, oil. I mean, that list is just like normal. Yes, I understand, but it adds up. You know, I kind of wanted to do an exhaust and stuff like that in this car, but that should give you some light onto what you should expect from a car like this. Do not drive this car every day. My advice for you, if you're picking one of these two cars, the M3 or the M5, and you're gonna be driving it every day, you either wanna have $5 grand at least on the sideline for fixing stuff, because especially if you do suspension and you're doing engine work or Vanos or something like that, which I haven't done, thankfully. At being an 03 car, it's pretty quiet and seems to be fine. You're gonna wanna have some money set aside to maintain this vehicle. So now that I've pissed off all of the M5 owners, you guys can get a feel for the true ownership experience. My opinion, it's a double-edged sword if you drive it enough. If you're driving this car frequently, at least 2 to 4 days a week, you're going to be maintaining it, especially if you're someone like me that's detail-oriented. It's going to be a lot of work, but that is part of the fun. The other side of that is, it's very rewarding. You have this car, you see guys that have this car, you're driving this thing around town or on the highway, you're getting on or off an on-ramp or an exit ramp or whatever. Like, I'm in third, I can just jump down, and we're just going, because the thing just wants to go. It wants to go if you're ready for it, otherwise it's chill, we're just having a good time. So one last thing I'm gonna say before we jump into the M3 is that I can't say this actually about any other car I've owned, is that whenever the time comes to sell this, because I do inevitably want to experience other vehicles, this is definitely a car I would buy again. As much as you guys might not believe that, because I've complained about maintenance and stuff like that, it's such a pleasure to own this car, and it's so cool. I love looking at it, I love detailing it, I love driving it. It's definitely a car that I can see why a lot of guys have owned several of them. They buy them, or you know, and then they sell them because they move or they have kids or whatever happens, and then eventually they get another one. And I can totally relate to that. Whenever, you know, the time comes to transition into something else, I can totally see eventually getting into another one, This one's actually been pretty great, although, you know, like I mentioned, I had a lot of maintenance and stuff, but it's definitely something that has given me such a positive experience. I've met so many cool guys just by ownership, you know, made a couple of really good friends, and yeah, it's been super cool to own. So that is sort of the verdict on the M5. I know that was a little long-winded, but I think we're gonna jump into the M3 a little more rowdy. We're gonna get a little rowdy here, and let's go. That sums it up. Okay, all jokes aside, guys, let's drive like sane human beings and not like a BMW driver. But E92 M3, 414 horsepower, 6-speed manual, limited slip diff. What else am I forgetting? Oh, maybe that it revs to like 8,400 RPM. All right, guys, so I'm gonna make a bold statement. I just get excited when I get in this car. The M5 excites me too, but for some reason I just feel like I just want to drive fast and do fun stuff. But the M3, I'm gonna make a bold statement here and say the M3 is one of the best sports cars for the money, one of the best weekend cars for the money. If you're looking for fun, you know, something that comes in a manual, something that's sporty, something that's affordable for most people, probably you can get one for low 30s, you know, low 30,000 bucks. You can get a pretty good one, couple of owners, 6-speed, and man, it is not the fastest car. I mean, let's be honest here. Yeah, the F80 spanks this thing, but the F80 is a lot more expensive. Let's talk about this car, not the F80. We're kind of talking about the M5 as well, but this car, I think, is probably one of the perfect balances of analog feel, but also like the quickness. You know, it's a properly quick car, probably mid 4 seconds, 0 to 60, and it has all the right kind of features that you want. It has Bluetooth, it has nav if you really want that, and it has, you know, kind of a newer feel versus like something like an E39 M5. You don't buy the M5 because you want some modern car with all the tech. You don't really buy this car for that reason either, but when you hop in, it's not gonna feel quite as dated if you care about that. So this car is a 2011, which is kind of crazy to think that my car is 9 years old, 46,000 miles, so it's actually not too bad on the miles. I know a few of you guys out there have like 20 or 30,000 miles, which is great, but for me, I have a little bit more. I like to drive it, I guess, a little bit more than you guys. So one of the gripes I had about the M5 is the steering. It didn't have a great steering feel, which is not that surprising for a 5 Series. The M3, on the other hand, amazing steering feel. This is still hydraulic steering, and it's perfectly weighted, especially if you put it in like MDM mode. It makes it a little bit heavier, but not too heavy. You can sort of dial that heavier or lighter depending on kind of what you like. But the steering, like when you go around a turn, it just feels so perfect. I wish I could explain that to you guys, but when you drive like a newer car, it might handle better, but this car gives you a better feel. That's why you buy this car, because it feels good, it sounds good, it looks good, and it's really nice to be in. You know, it's very comfortable. We're riding around 3rd, 4th gear in traffic, but if you want to rip it, you definitely can. Let's go before we get kicked out. So I have the windows down now, guys, so you can hear me a little bit better, but the exhaust, most guys put exhaust on these cars because stock, way too quiet. I have test pipes paired with the OEM muffler mod is what it's called. So we're gonna take this opportunity to downshift into 3rd. That sounds good. And that is absolutely a cop in front of me, so we're gonna keep it a little more chill. Okay, so another thing that you might want to consider about this car, versus the M5 is this one feels a lot more raw. Don't mistake that with it clanking or stuff rattling or anything like that. There's none of that. It is the typical BMW solid cabin, very quiet, very solid, no rattles in this car, but you can sort of like feel the connection to the gearbox. The steering feels so good. The engine, obviously, you have that induction noise unless you get an insane exhaust, and it has all the perfect sounds. It is definitely more oriented to a sports car versus the M5. So when you drive this car, you're gonna want to kind of drive it around a lot more turns. Oh man, I'm not even in MDM mode, and just the steering is just we're gonna obey traffic laws, use our blinker, do all that kind of stuff. Take another opportunity. And I'm not really pushing it, it's just my setup can get a little bit gnarly. It is a little raspy. I've been kind of thinking about changing it up. This is definitely the most raw version of the 3 Series, but you can definitely tell that it's truly only 30% of a normal 3 Series. 70% of the car is different. So don't get me wrong, the M5 makes terrific noises, especially if you put an exhaust. You know, that car is a 4.9 liter V8. This is a 4 liter V8, a little bit more horsepower. But I am going to get onto something that I don't like about this car that the M5 does have, and that is torque, and specifically torque down low. The M3 revs to 8,400 RPM, and most of that torque is not available until, I don't know, 6,000. I could be a little bit off on that, but generally speaking, I'm at 2,000, floor it. I mean, nothing happens. So you definitely have to be mindful. You have to really drive it differently. I remember I had a 335 before this, very torquey. Obviously, it's a turbo car versus this high revving V8. So the M5 doesn't rev quite as high, but it has that low end torque, where the M3, no one's home until 6,000, you know, which is kind of the fun of it. That's what kind of leads me to make this car so unique feeling, and this engine so unique feeling. The S65 V8 high rev. Okay, so one of my favorite things about this car that the M5 does not have is MDM mode, M dynamic mode, which is pretty much a programmable mode. You press the M button and you have all your presets go. Cool. But what I like about it the most, not because you can customize it, that part's nice, but it lets you play a little bit. So if you get a little loose, it'll let you get a little loose, but it won't let you slide off the road. All right, let's... Ooh, it's starting to get dark here, guys, so I'm gonna try to make this concise. I want to wrap this video up because it is getting a little bit dark, and I want to talk about really the 2 biggest differences that I see with these 2 cars. So the biggest thing that I think about with these 2 cars is that this car, the M3, feels like a true sports car. Coupe, rear-wheel drive, manual transmission, which I think you really need. I know there's some DCT fans out there, but it just gets really boring really fast for me, and like for a sports car, like, why wouldn't you want it? So I prefer the manual for sure, but the M3 to me is the perfect weekend car. It feels sporty, it looks sporty, it drives really good, it's new enough to where it's quick enough to like keep up with cars that may or may not be faster, but it's also not like insanely expensive to get one. You can get one for the low 30s, like I think I mentioned, and I think that's like a lot of bang for your buck. It sounds good and everything like that. So with that said, we're gonna talk about the elephant in the room, which is always in the room, is rod bearings. Rod bearings, rod bearings, rod bearings. Even if you have like 5,000 miles in your car, I swear to God, everyone asks you about rod bearings. My opinion on rod bearings. If you're that worried about it, just factor 2 to 3 grand into the price of your car. If you're buying a car over 60,000 miles, maybe consider getting rod bearings done kind of in the near future. If you have under 50, you're probably okay for a while. There's so many critics out there. Everyone's like just freaking out about stuff. I think it's overblown. I think the percentage of cars that actually have engine failure from rod bearings is pretty low. The percentage is low. So yes, it's a chance. Yes, it's dependent on how the previous owners have warmed up the car and yada yada. If you're that worried about it, just tack on $2 to $3 grand or buy a car that's had rod bearings done already. It just seems like one of those inevitable conversations. That's how I feel. I want to just cover that really quick. I have not had mine done, and my duration of ownership probably won't have it done by the time I sell, whenever that happens to be. Reliability, I mentioned the M5 is not the most reliable car. It's a 17-year-old M car. You're just gonna have stuff that breaks. What do you want? That's just life. The M3, on the other hand, has been dead reliable except for one thing, which actually plagues all of the E90 gen, is the AC evaporator. So apparently the brand that they use, Vallejo or whatever it is prone to leaking and not being efficient. So mine was starting to leak. It wasn't holding a charge. So I had to actually have a BMW tech totally take my whole dash out and everything like that, replace the evaporator. And under warranty, that's great, but now these cars are not under warranty, I don't think. So that's definitely something you want to consider, is the evaporator. Throttle actuators, you can do them yourself. They're not cheap, but just do them if you need to do them. Whatever. Those are really the big things. Yes, there's going to be fluids and suspension and tires. Tires are a big one. Tires are probably one of the most expensive things. Same thing with the M5, rear-wheel drive, 400 horsepower. That's what's gonna happen. You're gonna go through tires. So that is kind of my consolidated take on both of these cars. I love both of these cars. And I will tell you, the M5 definitely has a more cult following. It's been around for longer. And there's a reason for it. There's definitely a reason, absolutely. But if I had to pick one, oh my lordy! Why did I say lordy? I don't know.